The Awakening Fire by Cassidy Faline. Chapter 1. The Meeting. Airships floated above the shining steel city like giant bloated fish. Hieronymus Purvis stretched out his hand to touch the vision. This was it. This was what he had been looking for. The city stretched out before him, farther than he could see, fading away to blue and gray at the edges. Hero felt the wind lifting up behind him, pushing him gently toward the edge. Hero took another step closer. He couldn't rush down the mountain into the city, even though every fiber of his body ached to be there. If he got too close, he knew the vision would disappear. The wind pushed him again, more insistently, and Hero stepped back from the edge. He knew it wasn't real. He could feel the assuring stiffness of the mattress against his back, even with the image still lingering in front of him. He sighed and forced himself to close his eyes. If he kept breathing in this mirage, he could only be more discontent during the day. The feeling of weightlessness faded from his limbs slowly. His eyes opened, and he was in his bedroom. Gray lighting cut through the threadbare curtain over the one window. So, it was morning then. How disappointing. Hero rolled over and grabbed the book that still rested beside his head, thumbing it open to the pages that he had been reading the night before. He had to squint to read in the dim light. The dead hulls of the ship stuck out of the ground below us at abnormal angles, their connecting cloth having rotted away hundreds of years ago. The great steel spires could still be seen from the wall's edge, eliciting simultaneous worship and terror from my men. Hero's voice was low and reverent. He shut the book with a satisfying snap and a deep sigh. If given the chance and enough candles, he could have read about the ancients all night. That vision of the perfect society still danced before his eyes. Hero wanted to walk the land of waste on the other side of the adamantine wall, to see what was left of the old land. Nobody had seen over the wall to explore the old city since humanity had fled them about 800 years ago. Even the writer of this book, a famous Jasperarian noble, had not gone more than a mile out of sight of the wall before his men had grown afraid, forcing him to turn back. Hero threw his covers to one side of the bed and stepped out on the bare wood floor. It was nearing the end of summer, and Hero was glad that the heat had lasted. The floorboards felt comfortable under his feet. He stepped up to the far wall of his bedroom, where the two bookshelves were filled with so many books that their shelves sagged from the weight. The book in his hand slid easily into place, and Hero lifted a smaller, leather-bound volume from the top of a stack of books beside him on the floor. This book was not machine-bound like many of the others that Hero owned. This book had been sewn by hand. In Hero's mind, there was only one way to achieve that perfect society. Humanity needed to return to the ancients' laws. Hero thumbed the book open to the front page, stepped closer to the window, and prepared himself for the recitation. He closed his eyes and held his breath, stifling the yawn that threatened to break out. There is to be no murder. Man is not to raise a hand against another man. There is to be no war. Man is not to raise funds or armies to attack other men. There is to be no strife. Man is to elect his leaders without intimidation or coercion. There is to be no classism. Man is to be judged on his merits alone and not on the circumstances of his birth. Hero kept reciting, but his mind wandered. The ancient laws were considered absolute, not just by those who tried to observe them today, but by those who lived under them over 800 years ago in the time of the ancients. It was said that in those days, the smallest infraction of the law would earn the penalty of death. Scoffers called the ancients' laws the law of blood, and they called the ancients tyrants. There is to be no filth. Man is to wash himself daily and dispose of his filth outside of city limits, away from supplies of water and food. There is to be no thievery. Hero's voice failed him. He breathed out. He swallowed, but he couldn't continue. He glanced down at his hands. They shook so badly he couldn't read the page. A fat, heavy tear rolled down his chin, splashing onto his bare foot. He needed the ancients' laws to be enforced today. He needed those who stole and those who judged to be dealt with now. Tap, tap, tap. Hero, are you awake? The voice was soft, but it jerked Hero out of his thoughts. Quickly, he closed the book, placing it back on the top of the stack. I'm awake. Yes. Just a moment. Hero shut his eyes for a moment more, breathing out a quick prayer for protection and peace in the day to come. Then he crossed the room and pulled his door open. Joanna stood outside, leaning over the table in the common area. A large carrying basket was set up beside her. The common area had a high ceiling, where one could see the dark ebony rafters in stark contrast to the whitewashed walls. A table and several comfortable chairs were all the decorations this room held. Joanna whirled around at the sound of the door. "Ah, Hero. I'm sorry for waking you, but I have to go. Do you remember Faline, the baker? Something happened to his family. I don't know the details yet." If one did not know the two of them very well, one might easily have assumed that Hero and Joanna were mother and son. She was a middle-aged woman with the same blue eyes and orange-red hair. Hero had never been able to locate his real mother, the prostitute who had brought him into the world. He had searched the city of Rita for his mother, but to no avail. Finding his mother didn't appeal to him anymore. He had bigger ambitions. Hero had no problem with city folk thinking Joanna was his mother. It kept them from asking any more serious questions. Hero rubbed his eyes. "It's not even the 6th hour yet. What could have happened?" Joanna looked pained. "Fritz sent me a message. It's the city guard." Hero's warm, happy sleepiness evaporated like a summer cloud. Faline wasn't just a baker. He was a calligrapher, one of the few they had left. He stumbled the rest of the way out of his room and put his hand down on Joanna's basket before she could pick it up. "You can't go. They'll take you too." Joanna's right eyebrow rose dramatically, and she glared up at him. He towered over her by 1.5 feet, yet Joanna's look always made him feel small. "Hero, they won't know who I am. Faline knows to hide all of his manuscripts in the rag bag if anything happens." She fastened a shawl over her hair and under her chin and tossed the excess cloth over her shoulder. The color was a pale blue, brightened with the interspersing of white threads. She grabbed the handles of her basket and gave them a yank. "And I'm the rag lady." Hero relinquished the basket. She would never listen to him, and she had a plan, but that was better than nothing. "Ancients be with you," he whispered. "They are with me, Hero. Always." She slung the handles over her shoulder and jumped, settling the basket on her back. "If I'm not back before you leave, please lock the back door. Not that anyone would try to come in, but just to take the weight off my mind." Hero nodded. "Of course." Joanna gave him one last smile before slipping down the stairs and out of sight. He heard the door to the outside open, the sound of the early morning wind, and then it closed. The house was still and quiet behind her. Hero vocalized a deep sigh to cut through the silence. If Faline had been arrested for worshipping the ancients, it meant that the city guard had some way of knowing who they were. The thought was understandably terrifying. Hero's mind kept whirring. Too full to get back into his recitation, too full to spend time reading. He retreated to a wooden bar suspended across the rafters and pulled his chin up over the bar again and again until every muscle in his body and back burned. His chest heaved from the exertion. It wasn't just the ancient worshippers who had to fear the city of Rita. Hero didn't have a personal hatred for Lord Rita, but he knew many who did. Lord Rita, the current reigning monarch, had alienated many different groups of people in his quest to subjugate the country under his rule. Lord Rita had made it clear that any escaped criminal who had made their way to the capital would be sent back. Lord Rita had allowed the borders of the city slums to grow, to the detriment of the decent families below the city. He did not enforce any particular discipline in his city guard, allowing numerous abuses on the common people in the city. Lord Rita had gutted funding to the city council. He had raised taxes on imported fish, Stentilian stone, watch parts, etc. The list could continue into infinity. Finally, Hero released the bar and collapsed into a chair. Lord Rita would continue to be a horrible ruler as long as he tried to remove any remaining culture of the ancients' law from the people of Rital. Hero didn't know who would make a better king because it seemed like every noble family in Rital had the same apathy towards curbing humanity's natural behavior. To the contrary, they seemed to relish their own vileness. Not even Lord Terrace, the most lawful of them all, really believed that the ancients were still worthy of worship. Hero growled. It made him so angry. He needed to get ready for work. The blacksmith would be expecting him to come in before the shop opened, as he did every day. It allowed Hero to slip away early in the afternoon for other pursuits. Hero washed himself from the rainwater bucket outside the door, his skin prickling from the cold. The sun was just peeking through the alleyway between two businesses, covering the whole backside of Joanna's building in bright yellow light. He needed to hurry. Quickly, Hero walked from room to room, emptying each chamber pot into a small wooden barrel. This would be Joanna's task normally, but Hero knew she'd give him an earful if he didn't take over today. He knocked on Fritz's door out of the sheer habit before he entered. Fritz barely slept in his room anymore. The bed was made, and Fritz's chamber pot was empty. Hero shrugged. Better to check and be right than not check and be wrong. Hero locked the back door as he left and set the barrel to the side, making sure the lid was on tight. The filth cart didn't make its way through the streets until midday, and Hero couldn't stand the smell when the neighbors forgot and left theirs open. As Hero turned and started to walk away, he heard tapping, almost like a woodpecker. It stopped, and then it started again. Hero craned his neck to look all the way up to the house, but he didn't see anything. Woodpeckers were a menace to any building. They would peck through resin-protected wood, leaving a building open to rot or insect infestation. Hero groaned. He'd better find the thing before it got any further. Sucking in his chest, he slipped into a tight alleyway on the side of the house and stared up the wall. He didn't see anything there either. Maybe the woodpecker wasn't attached to their house at all. He stared up the side of the neighbor's house, listening. The tapping came again, closer. He was on the right track. Hero forged through the small space, headed for the front. He squeezed out of the alley into the main street, blinking. The city was already stretching its limbs, preparing for a new day. Across the street, the printer had his curtains open as he cleaned fingerprints off his large front window. Farther down the street, a bookseller's front door squeaked as his young daughter swung back and forth, hanging from the handles and singing to herself. The shawl around her head had come undone, and the corners of it dragged in the street behind her. The tapping yanked Hero out of his distraction. He jerked his head to the left. It wasn't a bird at all. Someone stood at their front door. Hero's brow furrowed. The visitor wore a cloak with a hood pulled over their head, and the shape underneath looked like a man. He wasn't even knocking properly, just tapping with a single knuckle like he meant to test the door's thickness. "Hey, you!" Hero strode toward the door, determined to send the fellow packing. He didn't have time for this, and Joanna probably wouldn't be home for hours. She didn't need a line forming at the front door while she was away. "The rag lady is out collecting her daily donations." Hero started talking before he'd even reached the man. "She won't be back for a while. I suggest you move on." The man recoiled from the sound of his voice, hunched as if he were scared. Hero sighed. It wasn't the first time someone had reacted poorly to him. Having a solid 6-inch height on every other man he met was intimidating. The man peered at him from under his hood, but Hero couldn't make out his face. "Did you hear me, sir? The rag lady isn't here. You're knocking at an empty building." "Hero?" Hero's grin faded. Only people who knew him well were allowed to call him Hero. "Who? It is you, Hero Reynard." The man reached up and lifted his hood just enough to shed some light on his face. "It's me, Gannon." It felt like the ground under Hero's feet had suddenly plunged at a sharp angle. He was dizzy. The face looking up at him under the hood was one he hadn't seen in 6 or 7 years. "What are you doing here? You—" Hero's head whirred around. They stood in the open street. He couldn't think of a worse place to be right now. "You have to get out of sight. Come with me. Quickly." He led Gannon through the alley and inside the back door. Gannon shed his cloak immediately. He was dressed in a bright red cloak with silver trim and a matching tricorn hat. Hero shook his head. "Gannon, are you mad? What if the wind had blown your cloak open? What if someone had caught a glimpse of your face? You'd be arrested on sight." Gannon didn't look the least bit apologetic for Hero's concern. A smug smile crept across his face as he looked around the small dining room and kitchen area. Finally, he met Hero's eyes. "Hero, I found you, all by myself, without any help from my father." "You're trying to prove something? Here? In the most dangerous place possible? Gannon, what is going on?" Gannon puffed out his chest. "I've run away from school, Hero. I've come to Thoros to kill the king and take the throne." Hero felt his mouth hanging open, and he shut it with a snap. His hands clasped around Gannon's upper arms, and he gave him a good, hard shake. "What in Isle's name are you talking about? You can't be king. The Rita family sits on the throne now." The fear in Hero's voice seemed wasted on Gannon. His eyes sparkled like he'd been offered a challenge. "Hero, you know as well as I do that the throne belongs to the Terrace family. That was the deal the 9 sons of Brandon made with one another when Terrace was founded. Each one of them had become a lord over their own territory except for the eldest. Terrace was to be the ruler of all the territories combined, and his capital would be Theris. Gannon had slowly become more intense until his hands shook like he wanted to throttle the air. Lord Rita murdered my grandfather, and Lord Rita will die for it. Hero felt a headache starting to form between his eyes, and he rubbed at it absently, knowing nothing would help. Nothing took away a headache that was firmly rooted. Gannon, he sighed. It's not Theros anymore, and the capital isn't Theros. It's Rita. We live in the country of Rital. The lords of Rital made that change before either of us were even born. Gannon shook his head, and Hero could see the anger slowly transferring from the situation to him. Gannon was unstable in a way that Hero had never seen him before. Of course, Gannon had only been a boy of 15 or so when Hero had seen him last, before he'd left Rital to go to school in Jasberin. What had happened in that time to make him so volatile? No, don't you dare side with them, Hero. They changed the name only 2 years after our throne was usurped, and our family had ruled for hundreds and hundreds of years. Our family? Hero crossed his arms over his chest. So this is your father's work? What schemes has he been breathing into your head? Gannon glared. He always wanted our family back on the throne. You can't spend an hour with him and not know that. I agree. But Ranald Terrace is the one who should be here. It's his revenge. He actually saw his father die. Why are you here? And why are you angry? He stirred you up to do his dirty work, hasn't he? Gannon deflated. No. He sounded almost sullen. You're wrong. I'm here because I want the throne. It will be mine eventually. Somehow. Father will see to it. But I don't want to be his puppet any longer. Puppet? Gannon stumbled back a step, ripping his hat from his head and crumbling it in his hands. It was terrible, Hero. The letters he sent me at school made me feel like they were actual chains around my neck. He wants to marry Sheila to Lord Saida. He wants me to marry some daughter of Lord Yes. I don't even know her name. He's planning to put every lord of Rita under his thumb and even force a takeover. Hero felt the need to look over both his shoulders, even though there wasn't anyone else in the house. This was a dangerous conversation to be having anywhere in Rital, much less in the capital itself. Yes, Gannon, that is who your father is. Hero spit out the words like they were poison. He has a different face for every day of the week. You should know him better than that. What are you accusing me of? I've told you my intentions here with complete transparency. I intend to kill the king with my own hands and take back my family throne. How? Was Gannon really this pampered and naive? He couldn't just march through the palace gates and right up to the king. He'd be killed 100 times before he made it inside. Gannon, how do you, all by yourself, intend to get within sword range of the king of Rital? That's why I came looking for you, Hero. You've been living in the city this whole time. I'm sure that you can help me. He leaned in, his look conspiratorial. And just think, once I'm king, I can order my father let Shelia marry you. We'll both get exactly what we want. There was a ball lodged in the back of Hero's throat. He couldn't even swallow. Sound rushed past his ears like a wave. So close, but impossible to grasp. Hero swung around and marched off, through the kitchen and into the storefront. He needed air, and Gannon wasn't giving him any. Hero, what did I say? How could Gannon do this to him? What gave him the right to waltz in and try to shatter all of Hero's well-laid plans? He didn't know how close Hero was to getting what he wanted, without anyone else's help. Gannon jogged after him, his arms stretched wide. Hero, you have to talk to me. What is it? You wanted to marry Shelia. I know you did. And I wanted to call you brother. Gannon had to run around in front of Hero to get him to stop walking. I want to help you. Hero glared. Yes, they all wanted to help the poor, helpless bastard. A bastard couldn't do anything to change his circumstances. A bastard wasn't allowed to rise without someone else's help. Even in Gannon's eyes, Hero was nothing but a useless bastard. He was a dog to be ordered around as Gannon saw fit, and then given a treat. Was Shelia just an object to him too? Gannon, get out. What? I don't want you here. For your information, my name isn't Hero Reynard anymore. It's Hieronymus Purvis, and I'm thriving on my own without anyone's help. I don't want to be a part of anyone's power game. Not yours, and not Reynolds. Just leave. Silence covered the room for several seconds. Finally, Hero had the strength to look Gannon in the face again. Gannon looked shocked. He kept shaking his head, over and over. But, I don't have anywhere to go. This was just another face. just like his father. It wasn't real. Oh, the great Ganon Terrace, future king of Ratal, can't reach into his wide pockets and buy himself a room for one night? Ganon was completely deflated now. I don't have any gold left. I couldn't bring very much with me lest I arouse suspicion in my warden. It wasn't a school so much as a prison. Ganon's face contorted, and for a second, Hero thought he might cry. Something resonated in Hero, a need to reach out and comfort. Despite time and distance and everything that had happened to him, Ganon felt like a brother. Hero grabbed Ganon's shoulders and pulled him into a hug. After a few seconds, he pulled back. Ganon, you can stay here today, but no more talk about plans of thrones. Agreed? Ganon smiled shyly. I'm grateful. That was more like the boy Hero had known. He clapped Ganon on the back. You should be safe here, provided you keep your face away from any windows. He breathed out and let all of his frustration go with it. It is nice to see you again. He smiled. You've gotten tall. Me? Ganon chuckled. You're the one who doubled in height, and when did your arms become as thick as tree trunks? I don't remember that. Hero shook his head. It didn't come easy. I've been training them every day. Come and see. They were halfway up the stairs before Hero could no longer hold in his questions. Ganon, is Shelia? She isn't promised yet. Father is only planning the match with Lord Sita. He hasn't finalized anything. Hero felt the tenseness around his heart start to dissipate. Do you have any idea how long? Ganon set his hand on Hero's shoulder. I don't. I've been locked up at school on the other side of the Middle Sea, remember? I haven't even seen her myself since. He sighed. Blessed Isle. That would have been before your father died. Hero nodded, trudging the rest of the way up the stairs. He could feel the burning in the back of his throat, an anger that he could barely control. He had to control it. He couldn't let Ganon see it. That was the last time that I saw her, too. I thought he had to swallow to get anything through his tight throat. I thought things would be different. Reynolds seemed so welcoming, and then, I know I'm not my father, but I apologize on his behalf. He shouldn't have led you on like that. I don't know why he did. Hero frowned, collapsing into the nearest chair. Reynolds had treated him with respect as long as he was useful to have around. Lord Terrace had told him that he had a mind for both machines and books, as well as a strength that rivaled that of most of all of his men. But the moment Hero wasn't useful anymore, Reynolds seemed to forget that classism was against the ancient laws. The silence felt awkward. Ganon strode around the common area like he owned it, greeting every fault in the walls with a humph. Do you see your half-brother at all, living here? He works at the palace, does he not? Hero frowned. What did Ganon know about Lamont? He didn't have the strength to talk about that right now. He does. Ganon's eyes narrowed. Shelia sent me letters at school. She told me everything. Everything. Truly? Hero didn't know how he felt about that. Who else had she told? Was his misery on display to everyone at the Terrace Manor? Hero shrugged. Doesn't matter, though. It wouldn't matter, though. Even if my half-brother decided to give me back my title and land today, Reynolds would never give me Shelia. I'm not important enough. Ganon had the good sense to look sheepish. I would never do that to you. And I can tell you from these brief moments together that you still love my sister. I know that you said no talk of thrones or plans, but Hero, I want to see the two of you married. If I were king, Ganon, stop! I don't want to discuss Shelia or my brother. It's exhausting. Hero could hear the 8th bell tolling from the capital's council hall block. Hero had always been punctual. The blacksmith would most likely assume he was ill. Hero frowned, and he couldn't leave Ganon alone in his house, not when his presence could get Hero and the rest of its inhabitants sent straight to prison. Hero yanked a second chair over and set his feet on his seat, leaning back with a sigh. Pull up a chair and tell me everything that's happened to you since we said goodbye 6 years ago. And don't leave a single detail out.